a horrible tale at number 10, we have dead rats on the wall. This story is so messed up. This whole saga was posted on Reddit No Sleep a few years ago by Redditor Moonbay. She went away with her husband to her grandpa's cabin, and on their way up to the country, her husband cracked his classic Slenderman joke. Sure, don't we all love a Slenderman joke? I mean, I guess, until things get scary and then it's categorically not funny. When they got to the cabin, the girl saw scratch marks on one of the sides. Now, it was kind of like someone had dragged a rake across the side of the house. She made a note to tell her grandpa, but assumed it must have been animals. That night she heard something outside, once again like a scratching. Her husband joked again that it was Slenderman, but then said seriously it must be rats, and in the morning he would set up some kind of pest control. It turns out it was indeed rats. Rats nailed to the cabin wall anyway. The husband was a bit concerned, but thinks it was just kids playing a prank. Now this would have been when I got the F out of there. The next night there is scratching noises and heavy breathing and growling coming from outside the cabin, and the pair both agree to leave at first light. Now in the morning they step out to a whole menagerie of dead woodland animals strewn around the property. Gross. Not only that, goodbye and thanks for playing is written in blood on the wall. Was it Slenderman or some other woodland killer? Coming into number 9, we have the garage. Incredible Folk 1 posted about an encounter with Slenderman in their garage in Texas, USA. Yes, that is how we say it in England. They admitted that they had read a lot of the No Sleep subreddits and they played the Slenderman video game. One night they said they went out after school to grab a drink and they noticed that their garage smelled a lot like gasoline. They grabbed an Arizona watermelon cocktail, and as they were walking out of the garage they heard a growling noise. They looked over their shoulder and that is when they saw it. What is it? Well, that's the question. The Redditor says that what they saw looked a lot like the description of Slenderman, just with no suit. They said it was like looking at a warped naked mannequin with abnormally long arms. They also said that the man's hands were black with an inky shine to them. When he went back to the garage the next day with caution, he took these pictures and these big handprints that he found. He comes through the Xbox at number 8. Something weird happened with an Xbox 5 years ago in Ohio, and then somebody posted to Reddit about their experience in a new house. My bud Da Vinci wrote that their new home had been the location of a murder and a previous reported Slenderman sighting. When this guy's parents were out one evening, he was playing video games online with some friends. Everything was totally fine until he got a text and he put his controller down to read it. When he went to pick up his controller, he noticed that his game character appeared to morph into Slenderman and then stare at him through the screen. Then he said the character started to move in the screen and then it seemed as if it was going to come out. Now this was when the guy woke up, thank goodness. He saw his clock which said it was 4 AM and he thought, whoa, that's really weird, he must have been asleep at his computer for almost 2 hours. He then noticed that his bedroom door and window were open. Now he was a bit freaked out and he closed them and went to check on his dog. When he came back into the room, he noticed the clock again. It was 2:16 AM. Weird, he thought it was 4 AM and 2:16 was the time he last remembered playing his game. What was going on? Coming into number 7, we have the Slenderman tape. Sometimes Slenderman will come for you, and in those times you need to just get out of there. Get out of there exactly is what this one Redditor did when Slendy came for him. Scissor of Venus wrote that in their old hood they saw Slenderman. Tall, slender, black, no face, creepy, sure. After seeing him a few times, he decided, you know what, I'm done with this neighborhood, I'm gonna move. Good on him, Slender's a creep. When they were at a new home, a village by a mountain, the guy's wife saw something weird in the mountain whilst hiking. Later the guy found a tape in a drawer that was seemingly an interview with a child called Jimmy. The kid seemed scared about something and the tape turned into screaming that, I quote, he said, he's here. This Jimmy kid seemed to totally lose it. He then seemed to hallucinate and the guy listening to the tape also had a hallucination of his very own. He dreamed that Slenderman came to him with his tentacles and that he actually hid his wife and a kid in a mountain cave. He then woke up to hear the kid in the tape screaming. Meet the only group that might be able to stop Slenderman at number 6. We have the Optic Nerve. Optic Nerve are also known as the Organization, the Bureau, and the Anti-S-Walker Unit. This is the legendary group that observes and tracks Slenderman. The Optic Nerve is highly secretive, but the urban legend goes that they're based in Washington and are a government organization, possibly a collaborative outfit between the USA and Germany. The ON is said to have been watching Slenderman for years, and they believe that he is harvesting organs for some kind of greater evil purpose. While the team tracks Slenderman, who they call the Toolman or S-Man, they don't yet know how to neutralize him. We have Slenderman in the Fog at number 5. The person from this Reddit post was convinced that Slenderman was just a creepypasta until they encountered him on a foggy night. The sun was setting and it cast a weird bluish light over the fog. The narrator's dog seemed antsy and the cat seemed really weird too, although the pair didn't love each other. When the writer of the Reddit post went into the bathroom, they looked into the mirror and saw something reflected. It seemed that there was a long, tall figure outside looking around. They thought it was just a trick of the light, but when they went out to let the cat out, they noticed that there was a crouched figure by the trees in the garden. As they strained to get a look at what it was, their neighbours came home, lighting up the fog around them with their car headlights. Now the figure then seemed to disappear. What was it? We'll never know. The Cannock sightings are coming into number 4. In 2015, Slenderman rumours were rife as ever when not 1 but 4 people reported seeing the spooky figure in and around Cannock in the Midlands of Great Britain. Some swear the sightings were Slenderman, others were convinced it was the lost soul of a ghoul roaming around the old mining town. That being said, 3 of the 4 Slendy sightings were inside a house. Now one witness said that they woke up to see a sphere staring at them in the shadows of their room, and as they got up to investigate, the woman said, and I quote, "As I tried to get out of bed and investigate further, the shadow began to stretch towards the ceiling. It was at that point I found myself faced with the most disgusting and horrific creature imaginable. It was about 8 feet tall and had a white face with razor-sharp fangs." Another household reported that the tall man had fierce red eyes and was wearing a black suit and a hat. The indoor sightings are being explained as the effects of sleep paralysis, but this is just too much of a weird coincidence. Another witness who reported seeing the man outside said that he wore a long black overcoat. What is going on in the middle of England? Coming into number 3, we have the Scottish and Irish folk legends of Fear Dúba. Fear Dúba is a Celtic legend about a dark man, the Black Man, I believe, if that is the most accurate translation. Fear Dúba is said to be a malevolent force that lives in the woods and wears all black. Sounds like someone we know. He's also said to have long, tentacly arms, which he's able to pass off as branches when he wants to be disguised. Now, by disguising himself as a tree, Fear Dúba is able to peep in the windows of children and tap on the glass with the branches. Speaking of branches, we have the legend of the Dutch Takkenman at number 2. Takkenman means branch man in Dutch, and the legend is strikingly similar to that of Slenderman, which leads me to think that the many Slenderman-like stories across the world might in some way be connected. We might not have the same name for the menace, but it is eerie how many different cultures have had a similar figure in their local lore. With Takkenman or branch man, he has legs that resemble thin tree trunks. He's very tall, blending into the woodland. Now with the American and English legend, it's more the arms that are long, but here it's the legs. Still though, it's thought that Takkenman shares some key similarities with the German legend of Langerman, long man. They're both creepy woodland dwellers that appear to show up in the background of seemingly normal pictures. Finally at number 1, we have the legend of what actually happens to you before Slenderman gets you. We have Slender Sickness. Those stalked by Slenderman have been known to contract what the internet is calling slender sickness. This sickness presents itself in coughing and sneezing fits, then leads to coughing and vomiting blood. It's also characterized by extreme exhaustion, paranoia, nausea, fever, nosebleeds, and a lot of short-term memory loss. Not ideal. The Slender Wikia explains this sickness is sigma radiation, so basically radiation poisoning. This is apparently contracted by being too close to the slender chap. Apparently the illness gets worse the more you spot him. If you do have these symptoms in real life though, I think maybe do see a doctor and don't let old Slendy Wikia diagnose you. Eats babies! I don't like this version of the Slenderman story, categorically. This story comes from a dream a girl had repeatedly between 2003 and 2005 when she was aged between 13 and 15, so she must be like my age now. Now this was some years before Slenderman went viral, making her story even spookier. She said she had a recurring dream about running through trees with moonlight spilling through. She stops, looks down, and sees she is carrying a newborn baby girl. When she looks up, she sees a man with no face with his arms out wide. The man is oddly slender. Some may call him a slender man. She said he had curly hair, which is a bit different from the usual description. The girl says in the dream that she hands him the baby and a hole opens up in his non-face and then kind of stretches out like putty. He then takes the baby and consumes it. The girl then runs away and brings him yet another child. So scary. So maybe Slenderman comes to you in your dreams and eats sacrilegious babies. Cool. Coming in at number 9, we have what happens when you Google Slenderman. Basically, Huns, don't Google Slenderman, or if you do, maybe just have a quick browse of the Google images and a good little laugh and move on with your life. Don't you research him too hard, as you may not like what you find. One 16-year-old wrote a story about how they started dreaming about Slenderman after looking him up to scare their friend. They had heard the warnings about not looking too deeply into Slenderman, but they all thought it was nonsense. They said after researching him that they loved the story, but they had a very uneasy feeling. It seems the uneasy feeling led to an uneasy night's sleep. The teenager's parents said that they had been sleep talking for hours in the night. On another evening, he felt watched as he went to sleep. He then had a very vivid dream. He drew what he saw in his sleep, and this was the drawing. Creepy. He also said that following the dream, he drew an operator symbol and taped it to his door, and since then, he hasn't had any more dreams. However, he has had a perpetual stuffy nose and sometimes gets fierce headaches. He also says that his phone shuts off unexpectedly. Is he being haunted by Slenderman? Coming in at number 8, Slenderman is Voldemort. What? The world of Harry Potter and internet creepypastas are colliding here. An 18-year-old girl wrote about her experience spotting Slenderman or Voldemort when she was 15 in Oklahoma City. She said her and her friend were out getting snacks from the 7-Eleven and they spotted a very tall, thin, extremely pale figure in the park. Her and her friend kept referring to the figure that they had seen as Voldemort. They talked about it for years, convinced that they'd seen the Dark Lord. Was he lost and recruiting Death Eaters all the way over in Oklahoma? I don't know. 2 years later, they came across the legend of Slenderman and immediately put 2 and 2 together. Perhaps they hadn't seen He Who Must Not Be Named, but actually, they'd seen something just as horrifying. Coming into number 7, we have the urban legend of the Stickman. One teenager recalled dreaming of Slenderman when they were kindergarten age. They said they went to bed and had a dream of a long, narrow corridor with only light coming from the end. They walked down the corridor into a bright white room. Now, when they turned back to get out of the unsettlingly light room, they saw a tall, slender man in a suit silhouetted in the hall. As they got closer, they noticed that the man was wearing a red tie. As they got even closer, they noticed how gigantically tall he was. As they then got closer still, they noticed that the man had no face. The kids screamed and screamed and screamed until they woke up. They noticed that the clock was 12:57 and that their dad was next to the bed looking worried. When their father asked if they were okay, the kid calmly replied, "Tall stick man." Scary. My one gripe with this story is, can many 4-year-olds read the time? I don't know. Coming into number 6, we have the origin of Slenderman. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what a death-bringing creep Slenderman is, but where did he actually come from? I may actually have an origin story for you here. On a website called Play With Death, I found a story about where old Slens may have come from. They say that he was once an American man who was tortured to death. First he was beaten with a log, totally battering his face. Then he was impaled with a 2-foot spike to a tree. They say that his arms and legs were pulled out of their sockets and stretched out and out and out and out again. He died a slow, painful death, and he came back to haunt wooded areas as a new type of long, tortured ghoul who wants to get revenge by murdering people in similar ways. Coming into number 5, we have the real story of the 2014 attack. Now this is an urban legend that turned into a true story. In 2014, a sleepover for 3 girls ended in disaster when 2 of them, Morgan Gazer and Anessa Weir, were found walking along a highway. The 3rd girl, Peyton Lautner, was stabbed and bleeding out in the woods. How did one girl end up with 19 stab wounds and teetering on death? Well, Morgan and Anissa said that they stabbed their 12-year-old friend because they were afraid of Slenderman. They said they'd seen him in the woods near Waukesha in Wisconsin, and that if they didn't stab their friend, Slenderman wouldn't let them live with him, which is what they wanted, and worse still, as they'd seen him, he would come and kill their families in 3 seconds. It seems the 2 teenagers had become obsessed with Slenderman, making the mistake of researching him. They wanted to become his proxies and live with him in the woods, but the only way they'd be allowed to do that is if they made a human sacrifice. The girls plotted to kill their friend for months before the attack happened. They really and truly believed in Slenderman. Coming into number 4, we have the Gravity Falls abduction. According to urban legend, Slenderman is making his way into mainstream media in order to brainwash vulnerable kids and teens. He has been spotted in the background of a number of shows. In 2012, eagle-eyed viewers spotted Slenderman in an episode of Disney's Gravity Falls. This scary bringer of death can be spotted in the background of an episode. Dipper and Mabel are in the woods, obviously, and Slenderman can be seen lurking behind them. He also apparently pops up in Dragon Ball Z and My Little Pony. Coming into number 3, we have the 2007 investigation. According to Slenderman stories out there, an investigation team discovered 22 bodies in the woods. The dead were said to be mainly children and teenagers. Now, the discovery became known as the Steinman Woods Massacre, and the incident was hushed up. According to the legend, the incident was reported by the organization. The organization are supposed to be like a special ops team that track Slenderman and try and contain him. The report reads, investigation team discovered 22 bodies of both genders and various ages impaled on broken tree branches in a radiating circle pattern with chest mutilations, as often noted with Slenderman. Upon confirmation, lead investigator called for an immediate evacuation of the investigation team at 1700 hours. Bodies first discovered at 1100 hours. Deadline for safe evacuation of team with only viewed physical evidence of Slenderman approximately 1730. Now, unfortunately, they lost contact with their team at 1725. A second investigation team then reportedly recovered a camera equipment a week later. I don't know what happened from there, it's all very hushed up. This is all we know about the Steinman Woods Massacre. Coming into number 2, we have the school fire story. Slenderman is not only a child abductor and possible baby eater, he's also an arsonist, according to this urban legend. It seems this image was found in the Sterling City Library. We see a scary man under a tree creeping up behind some kids. Oh, and he has tentacle arms like blooming Slenderman. He is also wearing a suit which fits the profile. You can't see any facial features, but he does look like he has a bit of a hairdo on him. The photographer and 14 children have been missing since 1986. Now, the library that this image was recovered from burned down. Want to see a picture from the fire? Who's that we see on the roof? Right. Finally, coming into number 1, we have the German tale of Der Grossmann. It seems that there are a number of different legends of a menacing Slenderman, not just in America. Slenderman might not actually be an urban legend at all. Instead, he may be an old legend dating back to the 1700s in Germany. It seems that in Eastern Europe, talk of a tall ghost slim man has been circulating since the 16th century. In Germany and Romania, they call him Der Grossmann, which translates to the tall man. He was said to be a fairy who lived in the Black Forest, which is in southwest Germany. Now, the Black Forest has been the center point of many fairy tales, especially from the Brothers Grimm, so suffice to say, it is a spooky place. In the German tale, the tall, slim man would chase bad children who snuck into the woods at night. A journal entry from 1702 seems to coincide with the legend of Der Grossmann. Translated from German, it reads, "My child, my Lars, he's gone, taken from his bed. The only thing that we found was a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but it's softer, thicker. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday screaming at the top of his lungs that the angel was outside. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me some nonsense fairy story about Der Grossmann. He said he went into the groves by our village and found one of my cows dead hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it at first, but now he's gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we're all killed. I'm sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me."
We have the Science Museum. This storyteller had read all about the Slenderman and couldn't stop thinking about him on a day trip to the Science Museum. Is he real? He seems so real. This girl has been known to have seen spirits in her past, and she wondered if maybe the Slenderman was just a demon that haunted people. A tall, pale demon. She was walking around the museum until she got to the space section. The museum was quite empty that day, and so she found herself alone. She went through a tunnel that is supposed to make you feel like you're looking at the night sky. She looked up, and in less than a few seconds, she suddenly became very aware that she was not alone. In the corner of her eye, she saw a tall man just hiding in the corner of the room. She got completely spooked that she tried not to move. She started to hear a weird sound, like a growling sound coming from where he was, and tears began to float down her face. She felt him walking close to her. She wanted to run for her life, but she felt frozen with fear. When all of a sudden, a young boy wearing a Minion shirt walked in, followed by his mother pushing a stroller. They made no indication of seeing something weird, and so the storyteller quickly turned in the direction that the Slenderman was and saw that he had vanished. She decided to go home and never read anything about the Slenderman ever again. Makes sense. In our number 9 spot, we have the opened door. This Reddit user was up all night reading posts about the Slenderman. Yep, he got sucked into the Slenderman phenomena and was reading people's seemingly real-life encounters with the mystical creature. He thought to himself, is he real? He can't be real, there's no way. He hadn't noticed that he had been reading posts until 5 a.m. It was time for work and he hadn't slept at all. He decided to call in sick. He then went about his day and went for a walk when he saw a pale shadow behind a tree. He looked closer and it was gone. He got a little spooked and went home quickly and locked the door. Then that night he went to sleep and woke up the next morning to find that his front door was unlocked. He looked at his security footage and at 3:33 a.m. his front door opened and nobody went in. He got completely spooked obviously and decided that he would never read anything Slenderman ever again. Well, that's pretty wild. Why is it always 3:33 a.m.? In our number 8 spot we have the grandfather's cottage. This woman and her husband lived in a place that was going through a heat wave, so she decided to go up to her grandfather's cottage to get away from the heat. She had heard of the Slenderman stories. In fact, her husband made fun of her for thinking that they were real. He even joked about Slenderman being at the cottage that they were going to. As they roll up to the cottage, she notices a few things are off. Some scratch marks on the house that weren't there last year, and there were half-eaten rats nailed to the wall. What? Pretty messed up. Throughout the one night that she stayed there, her and her husband hear creepy laughing and someone saying, "Come out to play with me." And they wake up to find a deer head on the front porch. Her husband, now being as creeped out by this as her, helps her pack up their stuff and they leave. She remembers that the trees have cameras in them to monitor the house. She looks through the footage only to find a note written on the house that says, "Goodbye, thanks for playing." And then in the corner, she sees a tall, thin man hunched over and showing his vampire teeth in a creepy smile. Needless to say, she never returned to that cottage. In our number 7 spot, we have the scream. 4 friends decided to go on a camping trip. They were having fun doing all the regular camping activities until one night when they were around the campfire, they noticed their friend went missing. They thought he was just pranking them, but when they flashed their flashlight at a tree in the forest, they saw a really tall figure run behind a tree. They were really beginning to get spooked, and so they decided to go to their tent and try to sleep and wait for their friend to return. In the middle of the night, the 3 friends heard footsteps approaching their tent, and one of them said, "Nice try, but we know it is you." There was silence. No response. Until suddenly a deafening scream that was so loud it shook their tent. The scream went on, and yep, they thought they were going to die, until eventually it started to fade. They waited until sunrise before they bolted out of the tent and into the car. They had a feeling that they would never see their friend alive again, and they were right. As they were driving away, they saw what they thought was a log floating in the water, but upon closer inspection, it was their friend. Whoa, okay, well I will never go camping again. In our number 6 spot, we have the hallway occurrence. This Reddit user's family is the first to live in her house, so she really can't explain the events that have happened. When she was younger, she woke up in the middle of the night and saw a tall, dark figure outside of her door. It must have been about 7 feet tall and very skinny. She thought that it was just her dad trying to creep her out, so she called out, "Dad, stop it." He was known to play pranks. The next morning, she asked him about it and he had no idea what she was talking about. She could tell he was being genuine. She spoke with her sister and apparently her sister had a similar experience. Then on another night, she felt breathing floating over her and she didn't dare open her eyes to see what it was. But then not long after, she was walking out of her room and she saw an oval-shaped shadow quickly rush at her door and then disappear when it got to her room. That was the last she saw of it, but she's convinced it was the Slenderman. In our number 5 spot, we have behind the fridge. This storyteller was coming home from work as he does every day and decided to go into his fridge in his garage to grab a cold beverage. He grabbed a cold Arizona iced tea and had turned his back from the fridge when he heard it. A soft growl that was gradually getting louder. He turned around to find a tall, lanky man with long arms and a featureless face. His arms were so long they pretty much touched the floor. Its hands were black with an inky-like shine to them. He wanted to scream, but no sound was coming out. Finally, a small shriek left his body and he ran. That was the last he saw of it, but 2 days later he went back to the fridge in the garage and he saw 2 handprints on it. Black ones. Dun, dun, dun. In our number 4 spot, we have outside the window. 3 young adults were hanging out at one of their houses, just sitting and chatting. The house was one of those places where you can't close the curtains, so 2 of the friends were talking while sometimes looking outside. Until one of the friends said, "Hey, what's that in the window over there?" Outside this friend's house was a motel. All of the windows of the motel were closed except one. Inside this window, it looked like a guy was swaying back and forth on something. One suggested that it actually looked like the Slenderman. They kept watching for about 15 minutes, the guy still swaying, and they started to think that maybe it was someone that had taken their own life. It didn't seem that way though, so they decided to sleep, and if whatever that was there wasn't there the next night, such as maybe if it was just the hotel room curtains of some sort, then they would be completely shook. It wasn't the hotel room, and it wasn't there the next night. In our number 3 spot, we have a rainy night visit. One night, it was really rainy, and outside there was a ton of fog. This storyteller was at home with her animals when her dog started acting really weird. Her cat followed suit. They would just stare down the hall and then jump and run as if they saw or heard something. She went to the bathroom and kept the door open as the dog would normally scratch on the door if she closed it. She looked up at the bathroom mirror that allows you to see down the hall, and that's when she saw it. There was a tall, humanoid-like figure right outside the window. He was dark and the outdoors was dark, and so all she could make out was that it was incredibly thin and its head was so high it was probably about 7 feet tall. It was just standing there looking around. She walked closer to the window to get a good look at it when it turned to face her. Just then her neighbor came home and its headlights flashed in its direction. She watched it disappear. It's safe to say that she went around the house and she locked all the doors after that. She never saw the Slenderman ever again. In our number 2 spot, we have the tape. This Reddit user had heard all about the Slenderman. Tall, skinny, long arms. In fact, he had seen him. He knew what happened when you see the Slenderman, and it completely freaked him out that he actually took his family from their home and they stayed in a house on a mountain. One day the man was just wandering through the house inspecting things, and he came across these tapes where a doctor and a man were talking about seeing a long, tall man that was faceless. He got completely spooked, and so he turned off the tape, only to see in the corner of his eye in the window the Slenderman trying to come in. He shrieked, grabbed his family, and went into the car to drive away. When he woke up, it was just a dream. He looked around the room to see his daughter crying and talking to her mom. She said, "He was here, I swear. A really tall, faceless man." Dun dun dun. Super meta. I wish he continued with the story. I'm half hoping that he'll wake up again. A dream within a dream. In our number 1 spot, we have The Show. This Reddit user was asked to babysit for her friend. She was babysitting a young girl with curly blonde hair. Not long after putting the girl to bed, the girl came out of her room, pale as a ghost, and said that a monster was outside of her room. This Reddit user looked toward the backyard where she saw a person with long, skinny legs, very tall and gangly, step over the fence and run into the woods. She became very scared and reached for her phone to call the police when she realized that her phone was disconnected. The TV turned to a channel that was like a surveillance camera in the girl's room, and a voice spoke and said, "We're coming." The Reddit user picked up the girl and grabbed the fireplace poker and started running to find a place to hide. She put the girl in the closet and then opened the screen door to go outside. The Slenderman looked confused as if he wasn't expecting that. The user ran at him and threw the poker in his head. The Slenderman fell to his knees and then onto the ground. Suddenly, lights were everywhere and people were screaming, "What did you do?" And this is when it dawned on her that she was on a prank reality show. She put the actor playing the Slenderman into a coma. She wasn't charged, as she didn't know, but the TV program was, of course. She has never been able to shake this off ever since, and for obvious reasons. That's insane.
Right, number 10, where it all began. We have to at least begin at the beginning. Slenderman first started back in 2009 when it made its first appearance on a website called Something Awful on June 10th of that year. It was posted by Eric Knudsen, 28 at the time, who went by the internet name of Victor Surge. It was supposed to be yet another entry into a paranormal image Photoshop contest, but no one expected what happened next. According to Eric, Slenderman was exactly that, a tall, thin, white-faced man with no facial features in a black suit. It had long arms that Knudsen said it would use to stalk young people and torment them with mind games. Soon, images and stories of Slenderman swept the internet, even earning deadly and dedicated followers, which we will discuss in detail later. As a result, many believe that Slenderman has actually been thought into existence through collective consciousness, that it has become a tulpa. A tulpa is an entity that is created in the mind and acts independently and parallel to your own consciousness. They are sentient beings who live in your head, but also live in the real world at the same time. So, while the initial beginning of Slenderman is fictional, there is just no guarantee that it remains that way. After all, as Dumbledore said, to make an entirely unrelated pop culture reference, just because it's happening in your head, why on earth should that mean that it is not real? Number 9, the Shadow Man. This first victim reports having been tormented by Slenderman his entire life and referred to him first as the Shadow Man. Many people who experience night terrors report seeing a tall, lanky shadow figure that torments them while in sleep paralysis. This guy first saw him when he was just 8 years old. While getting up to go to the washroom, they saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in the hallway. He reached out and beckoned to him with long, slender fingers. At some point, he worked up the courage to turn on the light, and the figure disappeared. 4 years later, it appeared again on his uncle's farm, standing in the highest window at the top of the building of the old barn, staring right at him. Then 2 years later after that, he appeared again, this time a lot closer. By this point, this person had developed sleep paralysis and it would happen fairly often. As they were about to drift off to sleep, there he stood at the end of his bed. They couldn't move or scream, and the figure just stood there watching him, waiting for something, until finally he burst up from the bed and Slenderman disappeared. But the sense that someone was watching him still remained and never went away. Number 8, trampoline. I mentioned previously that Slenderman became a kind of internet meme contest, but just how Slenderman became such a prolific urban legend remains unknown. Perhaps it's because of innocent sightings like this that make a more sinister explanation arise. Check out this clip.
After a record, when he played the video, he saw something like a Slenderman seeing him from his bed.
I think what freaks me out about this video the most is how horror film-esque it is and how mundane. It was just a kid wanting to record his badass trampoline skills, but what he wouldn't have noticed while he was filming was the presence of something watching him. Considering the fanaticism around Slenderman, it is possible that predators could assume its identity to carry out evil deeds. I don't know, but I hope he's safe and that who or whatever that was never seen again. Number 7, 7-Eleven. Apparently Slenderman loves a good Slurpee. This next story comes from a young woman from Oklahoma City. She was 15 years old at the time when her and her friend made a typical visit to 7-Eleven. Next to the convenience store there was a park with all of these weird statues. It was around 12:30 a.m. and usually it's an uneventful walk, but this time they saw an extremely tall figure, as tall as the branches in the trees nearby. It was dressed in black and extremely pale, sounds like Slenderman. Attempting to show no fear in the face of potential danger, she shouted at the person to see if she'd get a response, but to no avail. It just stood there, staring at them. I hate that. Needless to say, they booked it and referred to the being as Voldemort because that's kind of what it looked like. But then, years later, her friend informed her of the tales of Slenderman, and after seeing a picture, she realized that's exactly what it looked like. Imagine? No thank you. Number 6, a cemetery sighting. This next story predates the whole Slenderman launch as well. This Reddit user reports a story that happened in her hometown before Slenderman was even launched. Reports of kids seeing a tall man in a suit walking around was already the stuff of legend where she lived. Her friend's older sister was skateboarding home one night and she had to pass the cemetery. Of course, there's a cemetery. Of course there is. As she went by, she kept seeing tall shadows following her, and and she initially just like wrote it off as a weird reflection of the light, you know, as you would. But then when she got home, she saw a creepy looking old man wearing a black suit standing in her backyard. She ran inside and looked out the window, but he had moved. He was already across the street under the trees, again, still looking at her. Stories like this were pretty common in her neighborhood, but it wasn't until the Slenderman story actually launched in 2009 that people actually got really scared. If stories like this actually exist and remain to be true, then here's my question. Since the way he tortures his victims is through mental manipulation, who is to say that the image of Slenderman circulating is a result of the creature's own grand plan? Number 5. Alone in the Forest. This next story comes from Zach, who lives in Texas. This one creeps me out because it reminds me of the stories kids at school used to tell about the forest behind my school. While Zach was growing up, there was a big patch of forest behind his house. He used to play there all the time, but one evening made him question ever going back. Something was off about that evening, and so he began looking around. Off in the distance he saw a figure just standing there. It was impossibly tall, dark, with a featureless face, but somehow he knew he was staring right at him. Like a smart lad, everything inside him told him to run, and so he did. Follow your instincts, kids, okay? He was about a 7-minute run to his backyard, so he started sprinting, but no matter how fast he ran or where he went, the creature was always the same distance behind him. When he finally made it to the other side, he turned around and saw the creature stopped. He never saw the creature again, but years later, he started hearing about Slenderman and knew that's what he had seen. Number 4. Aaron Campbell. Aaron Campbell was a twisted young man obsessed with a wide variety of violent video games and just gore in general. He started out as they all do, by taking the lives of animals in vicious ways for pleasure. So when Aaron took the life of Alicia MacPhail on the island of Bute in Scotland, though shocked and horrified, no one could say they were surprised that Aaron was the perpetrator. Campbell was obsessed with anything that had to do with violence and was especially fascinated by Slenderman. This was just one of his fixations, and reportedly practiced voodoo while attempting to be YouTube famous. But his obsession with Slenderman finally became a reality. Alicia's death was gruesome to say the least, inhumane beyond belief. Thankfully, Aaron now sits behind bars for a minimum of 27 years, but honestly, hopefully forever. Number 3. House on Fire. This next one was one of 3 crimes inspired by Slenderman and goes to show how dangerous obsession can be. In 2014, Lily Marie Hartwell walked to a park in the middle of the night. She carried with her a backpack full of knives, lighters, flashlights, cookies, and some water. Lily had just carried out an act brought on by an obsession with the tale of Slenderman. Unbeknownst to her mother and brother who were sleeping at home, she had just set her house on fire. Thankfully, the two escaped the fire with no mortal injuries, but their entire home fell to ash. According to police accounts, Lily confessed to having been obsessed with the creepypasta story of Slenderman. She tracked down story after story about the creature and kept journal entries mentioning murder and death. One particular entry is chilling to read, especially after such a horrific event. It reads, and I quote, "This keeps up, there will be no safety in this house," unquote. Lily was charged with arson and 2 attempted homicides. Weirdly though, Lily sent a text to her mom after the fact that read, "I'm so sorry mom, I don't know why I did it. Did any of you get hurt?" Like she was actually concerned. So it kind of goes to show that she was in a weird space and maybe she snapped out of it. Could it have been Slenderman? We don't know. Number 2. White Mask. One of the key tropes of Slenderman that I mentioned previously is his ability to mentally torture its victims. So could that be the reason as to this next story? In 2014 in Cincinnati, Ohio, a mother who chose to remain nameless along with her daughter was returning home from work. Her daughter was waiting for her silently in the kitchen, wearing all black clothing and a white mask. Already we know who she's trying to imitate, and given the daughter's reported obsession with Slenderman, you get the idea. But next, the unimaginable happened. The daughter attempted to stab her own mother in the chest. The mother was able to thwart the attack, earning only minor defensive wounds. Apparently, her daughter had a history with mental illness and Slenderman had become an obsession of hers. She had drawings, diary entries, and references to killing, and even made a whole world dedicated to the creature on Minecraft. The girl's fascination inspired her attack on her mother, but there was something very off with her daughter, stating to police, and I quote, "She was someone else during the attack." Number 1, last but not least, fatal followers. We had the infamous Slenderman trial. Morgan Geyser and her friend Anissa Vire were fanatic believers in a legend of Slenderman, and the consequences were almost deadly. In May of 2014 in Wisconsin, the girls made an attempt to show their dedication to this false idol by offering up a sacrifice. Their victim of choice was Peyton Leutner, one of their classmates. The two girls lured Peyton to a slumber party at their house and decided to play a game of hide and seek in the forest. During the game, the two girls got knives, pinned her down, and left 19 wounds and hit 2 major arteries. They fled the scene of the crime, and Peyton, being the utter badass that she is, dragged herself to a nearby road where she was saved by a nearby biker. Peyton lived to tell the tale, thankfully, and both Anissa and Morgan have been diagnosed with childhood onset schizophrenia. Morgan was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, which moved it to an adult court. Geyser was ordered to spend 40 years in a mental health institution, and Anissa was committed to a mental health facility for 25 years.
Let's get into it. Starting off number 10 now, we have Jeff the Killer. This is one that somehow I didn't include in the first part. I'm sorry, I don't know how I missed it out. Looking back at it, I thought I'd start off with it this time to make up for it though. This is the famous story of Jeff, a normal boy living a normal life until the age of 13. His family moved him to a new area against the wishes of he and his brother Leo. They were attacked by bullies, and when Jeff fought back, he hurt them so badly that the police tried to take him away. The depression and rage he felt after this encounter shows how Jeff went from a normal boy to a twisted psychopath. The next time he met the bullies, there were guns, smashed bottles, knives, and bleach. Jeff was victorious, but now he had a hideous appearance to go with his twisted personality. That was only the beginning though. Jeff carved a Glasgow smile into his own cheeks before butchering his own parents and then turning the knife on his brother. The story is a fairly long read, and there's been a lot of spin-off stories from it, but it's also become a rite of passage for any creepypasta fans. Next up at number 9 now, we have Eyeless Jack. This is Eyeless Jack, a terrifying being with no mouth or nose and eye sockets blacker than the void itself. He makes up for his lack of features though by stealing other people's. Eyeless Jack arrives through your bedroom window in the middle of the night. Black slime oozes from every orifice on his body. And here he gets meticulous. He will cut his victims open, but will only ever take one thing. If, however, the victims begin to rouse, Eyeless Jack becomes enraged and violent. He will hack and slash, mutilating victims to death. The original creepypasta draws people in as an eye-widening piece of internet horror, and the spin-off stories keep people coming back for more. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Tiki Toby. This is a famous creepypasta that a lot of you guys recommended. The story revolves around a boy called Toby who suffered from mental disorders as a child. It talks of him being bullied and also being homeschooled. He was abused by his father, and when he turned 17, his sister was killed in a car crash. This sent him over the edge mentally, and one night, returning from hospital, Toby saw the Slenderman, a man who needs no introduction. Slenderman stalked Toby for weeks, causing many visual and auditory hallucinations. His mother brought him to a psychiatrist, but to no avail. He dreamed of his sister's corpse, followed by an attack by the Slenderman. The voice in his head told him to kill his father, and one day those voices got the upper hand. Toby stabbed his father in front of his mother. In a desperate attempt to escape the police, he set the whole neighborhood on fire, but was soon surrounded by the flames. Just before he was consumed, Slenderman appeared in front of him and saved him. 2 weeks later, Toby's mother heard that her son was the main suspect in the murder of several teenagers. From this day on, Toby was a proxy of Slenderman. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Ben Drowned. This was another creepypasta that many of you guys said I should have included in the first part. I went and found it, and wow, it's a long one. Essentially, it's a story written by Alex Hall, who's also known as Jaducible. It revolves around an old Majora's Mask cartridge that is haunted by the spirit of a boy named Ben. In life, he was sacrificed by the Moon Children cult. His father was the one to drown him. The cartridge, with his spirit in, was passed from person to person until landing in the hands of the storyteller. He says that the game glitched in weird places, characters spoke strangely, and the music sometimes played backwards. The story goes on to explain the influence of the cult, what really happened to Ben, and maybe why you shouldn't trust a storyteller at all. Next up at number 6 now, we have Clockwork. Her real name was Natalie Ouellette. She was once a normal girl, nothing out of the ordinary, either good or bad. However, when she was young, very young, the story was that Natalie was abused by her own family. The abuse mainly came in verbal and physical forms, although the details are quite hazy. During it all, Natalie is unable to tell anyone of the pain that she is going through. Eventually, she comes to believe that time itself, the very concept of time is somehow against her. And not only that time led to her abuse. The story follows her through her tortured childhood, her battle against time, and the disturbing loss of her sanity. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Sally. That's the name of the story and also of the main character, a 12-year-old girl who had been sexually abused by her own uncle and threatened into silence. Eventually she caved in and told her parents something was wrong. They just dismissed it as a nightmare though and sent her away. Sally was left with her mouth still hanging open, the words of her abuse not able to reach her lips. She wasn't able to go into the details of the horrors her uncle inflicted upon her. Even worse though, her uncle heard her trying to tell her parents what happened and decided to take revenge. Tricked Sally's parents into letting him take her to the store, despite Sally not wanting to. Instead, he drove her to a park and killed her by smashing in the side of her head with a rock after beating her up. The creepypasta details her story in much more gory, drawn out detail and even goes on to explain how Sally now haunts her old house, terrifying adults in the neighborhood while playing with the children there in peace, at least for now. Coming in at number 4 now, we have the Bloody Painter. His real name was Helen Otis. One day at school, Helen decided to not help a girl named Judy who had lost her watch. A boy called Ben pointed out something in Helen's bag. Ben took it out and saw that it was the watch. Judy flipped out, blaming Helen that he stole the watch. Helen tried to tell her that he didn't do it, but no one believed him. One day, Ben came back and this time he took his notebook and tore up his drawings. That upset Helen. He couldn't hold it in anymore and so he punched him. In return, Helen was beaten badly. A few months later, he got a Facebook message from a stranger. It was a boy called Tom who had also been bullied. The pair bonded over this. A couple of days later, Tom asked Helen to meet him on the school rooftop. Helen agreed and went to the school rooftop the next day. When he got there, Tom told him that he framed Helen with Judy's watch. They both fought and Tom fell off the roof. Helen tried to save him, but he didn't have the strength to save him. This made his bullying worse because people said that he killed Tom, or at least didn't save him. Later that night, Helen lost it. He believed that Tom deserved to die and believed that others deserved to die as well. He killed everyone who bullied him under the name the Bloody Painter. Next up at number 3 now, we have Anora Petrova. This is a scary creepypasta that fits well into our modern age. It's the story of a woman who was on track to become a promising figure skater in the US. Everything was going great until she discovered an evil, sentient Wikipedia page about her own life. It somehow detailed her death and the deaths of her family. It drove her to insanity. Anora tried to edit the page. She tried desperately to change her own fate, but her life spiraled out of control in the most horrific ways. The harrowing tale is told from the point of view of Anora as she continues on the descent into madness. Perhaps the creepiest part of the whole thing is that the Wikipedia page stops talking about her fairly on and instead starts addressing the reader. That's you. It instills a fear in people that it could happen to anyone, and it's a reminder that with the growth of the internet in this new age of information, there are many corners for evil to hide. Next up now guys, at the number 2 spot we have Judge Angel. Originally she was called Diana. Ever since she was born, her father never loved her. She looked nothing like her parents and all her family ever seemed to notice were her eyes. Those deep, black, soulless eyes. Eventually her father even left the household, unable to be around her. When she was 15, Diana was beaten by her father for wanting to go outside. Diana was not allowed to. When her mother tried to comfort her, her father turned on her too. One night Diana and her mother decided to run away on Christmas Eve that year. When the mother told the father this plan, he flew into a rage and beat her to death. Diana then picked up a sword from her father's study. After a final confrontation, she slew him on the spot, pronouncing him guilty. She burned the house. She was seen by witnesses for the last time standing outside of the burning home, and people swore she had wings. And finally, number 1 now, we have Nurse Anne. This story tells of Anne Lucen Mia. She was once a normal, hard-working nurse who unfortunately could never seem to get things right. Try as she might, there were always terrible mistakes when treating her patients. One day though, a serial killer caught her at work. When she entered the room, the killer jumped her and started cutting her up into pieces. One of the other nurses found her dead. They took her to a specialist hospital and unbelievably, they were able to stitch Nurse Anne back together again. A disembodied voice helped her track down her killer and enact her revenge upon him. After she started killing though, she just couldn't stop. As time went by, her killing only increased. In the end, other creepypasta characters took an interest in her. To see her involvement with the other characters and the full extent of the grisly deeds, you'll have to read the full story of Nurse Anne.
At number 10, did it exist exist before? So this comes from back in 2008 when a book was published, There's Something in the Woods. It's a non-fiction book by Nick Redfern. And so within it, a witness he interviewed had an encounter on Lacanic Chase with a paranormal entity that sounds quite a bit like Slenderman. While you listen to this description, keep in mind that Slenderman wasn't invented until that competition in 2009. Plus, this person's specific encounter happened in 2001, 7 years before the book's release and 8 years before the first imagery of Slenderman was posted online. So think about that. So in it says, this character was tall with very thin arms and legs, dressed in what I presumed were gray trousers and a tight long sleeve shirt of the same color. His hairless head was elongated and neck spindly, and his arms reached practically past his knees. I could not discern a facial feature. I realized he was around 3 meters tall. And so if you think of that, and then the imagery of Slenderman, put that together, is it possible that Slenderman existed before the imagery did? Let's think about that. But first, on to a video number 9, seen climbing buildings. So this clip apparently comes from Russia. In the video, you see some shaky footage of a building, and then a dark figure is seen making its way down the bright side of the building. It appears to have a very slender torso and small head, but very long arms and legs. It appears to be climbing downwards. In comparison to other versions of Slenderman we have seen, this one is much larger. But some resources say that Slenderman is known to shapeshift, so could be him. Some people say he has tentacles springing from his back, so who's to say whether or not he's stretchy too? Also, this makes me think, is this what Spider-Man is really? Because look at those limbs. It looks like a giant daddy long legged spider crawling up the side of a building, or crawling down the side of a building. Either way, this is a long lanky guy looking for his next meal, and I wouldn't want to be in that building, honestly. On number 8, we have window watching. So this one comes from Yoon B. Del Rey on Reddit. They said they watched a video called Slenderman Sighting 2012 during the day, and they thought it was a fake one when they clicked it on the link, but after watching it, they still thought it was fake. Surprise. Later that night though, they did have a weird experience that made them change their mind. From their living room window, they can see past their fence to a big hill located behind their front yard, and they have sliding glass doors exiting to the backyard from the kitchen. They heard a knock on the glass doors in the night and went over to take a peek. They didn't see anything, so they shut whatever blinds they had there, locked all the doors and windows around the house, and then went back to what they were doing, watching movies. So as they continued to watch movies with their dogs, they got the crawling sensation that something was staring at them. They went to look out the window of the living room and said their soul was lost. There's a tiny window there that points out the backyard so they can look out. They saw what looked like a tall man with a black suit and tie. He had no face and was extremely skinny. He was standing up on the hill looking right at them. They ran up to their room and locked the door and hid in the closet, just not wanting to deal with it, and then nothing happened, but they still hear knocks on their window every once in a while. After just watching some videos and having that experience, I'd be kind of creeped out too. And so what was the video they watched earlier that day that made them think of Slenderman? Well, that is our number 7, kid on trampoline. In this video, there's a kid bouncing around doing tricks on a trampoline. Behind him, in between the shed and a green barn-like structure, is a figure. The figure has an all-white face that looks like an upside-down egg and is in black clothes. When the camera zooms in closer, it appears to be in a suit, a blood-red dress shirt, and a white tie. After the zoom in, the camera gets shaky and the footage ends. So now keep in mind, while the footage can feel ominous and is kind of creepy to me, this could also be a man in a white morph suit with clothes on top. So always keep an eye out for what you think might be a fake. Still creepy to me though. We have another video at number 6, on the computer, then something in the hallway. So this video starts with the person behind the camera directing it at someone on their computer. Then they turn towards the hallway and we see it. Although it is shaky footage, we see something for a split second that is so tall that its head nearly hits the ceiling, and it also has long arms. There is then again shaky footage, but the camera turns back to what is believed to be Slenderman. This time there's a glow of light behind it, so we can kind of see the figure a bit more. And also, now I'm not so sure what it may be, because it could be maybe a shadow that is cast, but I wouldn't go messing with it. Number 5, in the Titanic. So this video comes from Travis Andrew Barker on YouTube back in 2012. His brother or him caught Slenderman behind Rose and Jack in the movie The Titanic.
My brother was watching The Titanic and he found Slenderman. If you can see right there, we paused the movie.
So after watching it, yes, I understand Slenderman's need to interfere with Jack and Rose's relationship. We all know 2 people could fit on that door. That's just physics. But this also is a bit much, Slenderman, you know? Appearing in the Titanic movie, I bet this may be overexposure on maybe a fancy, like, white guy's face at the same time. what is happening? How did Slendy get in there? Also, this is obviously a VHS tape, and Slendy has no business doing that on a VHS. Leonardo DiCaprio may be babyfaced in this movie, but he's no child, no victim for Slenderman to go after, so move on. And also, keep your tentacle arms off Kate Winslet because she deserves better. Also, in this video, my favorite thing is this guy says, I mean, my brother was watching the Titanic trying to cover up for himself, so you know what, I get it. You know, you don't want people to possibly roast you for watching a conventional rom-com, but I commend you. On top of that, you spotted Slendy, so good job. On to number 4, man sees daughter walking away with Slenderman. So in this video, we hear a man's voice calling out Sally while running down a road. Then he says no a few times before moving the camera upwards and zooming in on who I assume is Sally with a figure. Once he zooms in, we see her walking with a white, smooth-headed man in a suit. Slenderman? Maybe. Possibly a fake as well. So the footage is quite shaky, and Slenderman is taller than the girl, but not as tall as the tales of Slenderman say. But the hand-holding is a callback to the original photo submission for the contest, so I will give them that. Also, either way, if anyone's walking away with, I don't know, your daughter, niece, just person in like a field, that's just creepy regardless if it's Slenderman or not, you know? Moving on to number 3, kid sees something in his backyard. Or Slendy in the garden. So in this video we start off with a kid in his garden saying he saw a weird figure outside in the garden from his window. He pans upward and beside his red shed is a white-headed figure in dark clothes. The kid starts shaking and screaming and then runs off with the camera pointed at the ground. And yes, I know this could be fake, I know. But the kid is fearing something. Like, the screams sound so real. Like, does he know it's award season? Because if he is acting, he deserves an award. I believe it. Just amazing. I'm quite empathetic, and hearing that kid screams, I'm like, I feel for this kid, you know? He had to go through that. I don't, oof, ugh. Shivers. Meryl Streep who, you know? On to number 2, old footage. So this footage states on it that it is from April 7th, 1996. With different apps and editing tools, it's easy to fake the old camera look, so I wouldn't trust that part of this footage too easily. Plus, if it ends with a blackout, what is this, found footage? I don't know. But if we do take this video at its word for what it is, someone is looking around a structure and slowly moves their camera around the far corner. What they see is a tall figure in a suit with long arms that matches our Slenderman description perfectly. Once the person sees Slenderman, the camera goes down, but it seems to go down slowly as if the camera person is giving up on either filming or is defending themselves. And I don't know which. But I did mention that Slenderman may have powers to distort camera and audio equipment and may have mind control powers, so maybe this is evidence of that. I don't think so, but it is a possibility to keep in mind. On to number 1, luring. So this video has this kid in a cheery voice saying, I see Slenderman, and this nice dad is saying, no, not the real one. And then lo and behold, he turns the corner, the video distorted, and the man is being affected in some sort of way. Think for yourself, what was Slenderman's agenda? Making the kid bring his dad over so he could kill the dad and then steal the kid away? Or what? Because we know Slenderman goes after kids, so if the kid's already looking, what is Slendy doing here? I don't know.